Quigley always moved with a cheerless look in his eyes from having to haul back a loaded junk cart after many hours of scavenging through the nearby wastelands. A procedure to which he was very much accustomed to doing. Quigley was an android servant. He was both designed and constructed by the hands of his own master, a cybernetic engineer who lived and worked within the dark confines of his own laboratory. Built from the collected junk of the old days, Quigley was nothing more than the product of a bunch of corroded parts. Parts that the master had once salvaged from the barren land of the outside world that was known to everyone as the realm of yesterday. This realm was a poisonous wasteland of misery that played graveyard to the many victims of a chemical war that was once fought there years ago. The master would often scavenge the outskirts of this realm, looking for whatever junk that would contribute to the continuation of his work back at the laboratory. One evening, while walking past the remnants of an old billboard sign, he came upon a rare and most pleasing find. Reaching down, he picked up this newfound treasure of his that was once state-of-the-art technology from a company called Industries. He then turned to look upon the old billboard, which sat half decomposed into the ground a few meters away, and laughed to himself about a hopeless vision that was obviously unforeseen by an eyeless world which no longer existed. Placing the Zychron component into his cart, he journeyed on with the confidence of knowing that this meaningless piece of decaying junk would someday prove its usefulness. Quigley came to be a very useful servant who did all that was expected of him. From sweeping the floors and cleaning the equipment, to scavenging through the old subway tunnels, searching for whatever junk that might be usable. And at the end of every day, he would rest his heavy eyes upon the narrow ledge of the laboratory window and stare out far beyond the confines of his secluded world into the vast domain of the realm of yesterday. Always, his eyes would lay fixed upon the ghastly sight of a tall building which stood dilapidated but strong in the far distance. A structure that dominated the horizon of polluted sky, deep within the heart of the realm. He would gaze at the structure in awe, for the reasons of its existence were unknown to him. A cloud of mystery that plagued his mind every night as he sat there looking into the boundless stretch of unknown territory which resided before him. An obscurity both fascinating and tempting. Although no one came to realize it, Quigley was an android of much intelligence. He developed a strong interest in the operations of the lab, and often he would remain in the distance, hidden within the shadows, and watch his master hard at work. His eyes fixed with focus and his mind filled with interest. As time went by, he came to learn a great deal about the perplexing intricacies of his master's work, a knowledge he gradually acquired and then put to good use when one day he decided to create a machine of his own. A machine that would have undoubtedly proven to have been a great benefit to the lab. When the machine was complete, Quigley put down his tools, reached over and switched it on. Instantly, the machine began to spring to life. Quigley watched the success of his achievements with much satisfaction, and a sense of fulfillment started to flow through his circuits. And at that very moment, without warning, the door of the storage room violently swung open, and in came the master, who instantly proceeded to scold Quigley, telling him that all he was doing was wasting his time. For the master did not approve of Quigley's negligence towards his duties, nor did he believe that such a mechanical entity as roughly constructed as Quigley could ever possess enough intellect to create a machine which in turn possessed the sophistication needed to attain purpose and usefulness. With a firm thrust of his foot, the master shoved the machine with great force, sending it smashing into the wall. He forbid Quigley from building anything ever again. Poor Quigley lowered his eyes in shame and sat motionless as an unescapable pool of sadness fell upon him. Shortly after the rejection of his machine, Quigley began to realize that nobody looked upon him as being an equal. Often, he would have to make routine trips through the twisted maze of age-old subway tunnels that still existed beneath the surface of the land. These tunnels were sealed off long ago after the Great Wars and supplied with breathable air so they could be used as transport routes by the local people. During one of his trips back to the lab after a long day of searching for parts, Quigley experienced a rather unpleasing encounter with one of the newer, more sophisticated type androids. From out of nowhere, this android came hovering through the air at such a great speed, it crashed into Quigley's junk cart, causing all of his collected parts to spill out onto the ground. Instead of apologizing to Quigley, the hovering android loomed high above him with an angry face and looked deep into his eyes. He then told Quigley that all freak machines such as himself ought to be rounded up and dismantled, for they caused more harm than they did good. Quigley began to feel the overwhelming void of emptiness that was starting to grow inside him. Slowly, he attempted to gather together all the parts of junk which had spilled from his cart. And out of all the people who passed by him that day in the tunnel, kicking about the parts without any concern for Quigley at all, not even one of them bothered to stop for a moment and lend him a helping hand. From that day on, Quigley merely existed as a being who believed he was living a life of worthlessness. A thunderous electrical storm, intense and powerful, raged with dominance one night while Quigley was in the lab, washing the floor of the storage room. He moved about joylessly, the feelings of worthlessness still within him. Suddenly, the master slipped in through the doorway and went straight for his bench. He immediately started gathering together many supplies, tossing them into an old sack. Quigley looked up with a sense of astonishment, for he had never before seen his master progress with such agitation. Once his supplies were collected, the master turned to face Quigley and told him that an emergency had come up and that he was needed far away to perform immediate surgery. That he wouldn't be back for several days, and that while he was gone, Quigley was to continue with his duties and be on his best behavior. And then he was gone, leaving the room as swiftly as he had entered. This was the first time that Quigley had ever been left on his own in the lab. The fierceness of the storm raged on as night slowly turned into day. Quigley went about doing his duties as though nothing were out of the ordinary. Although, with his master away, the sense of loneliness that was beginning to strike him only added to the misery he was already feeling. day turned back into night again, and still the storm failed to dissipate. Quigley paid no attention to the thunderous rampage that was taking place outside, for his mind was already preoccupied, lost in thought as to why his life was so insignificant next to the lives of the other androids. Why did the humans place so much value on them and approach them always with decency, while they only approached him with cruelty? Iroh was a data transfer cyborg who worked for many people of the local community. From time to time, he would stop by the lab upon request to upload current information into the master's computer. Quigley looked over at Iroh as he plugged himself into the main computer console. He watched him profoundly and began to think of how important this cyborg was to the community, of how so many people relied upon him every single day for many different reasons, and that if something tragic were to ever happen to him, his absence would be felt by many, whereas Quigley himself could die tomorrow and no one would even care. Feeling depressed now more than ever, he went over to his favorite resting spot and once again laid his eyes upon the windowsill, trying to regain that tranquil sense of aspiration he always felt every time he stared out at the giant structure which stood in the distance. As Iroh was preparing to leave the lab, he noticed Quigley stooped against the window. A cloud of sadness all around him.
They tried and died.
With a careless attempt, Quigley motioned his eyes to look over at Iroh. Then, with an equal amount of effort, he moved them back again. Iroh curiously looked out the window to see what it was that Quigley had found so mesmerizing. He saw the enormous structure standing in the distance, and then told Quigley that in all his years of existence he had never seen anything quite as spectacular as the great Tower of Yesterday which stood before them. Iroh's words stimulated Quigley, and instantly he became alive with excitement. He was never aware that Iroh possessed information about the outside world. He wanted to know more. He wanted to be able to fathom all there was to know of this mysterious structure which intrigued him so. He paid close attention to Iroh as he proceeded to tell Quigley all he knew about the legendary Tower of Yesterday. For this age-old building, which still stood as tall as ever, was said to have been the apparent resting place of the mighty Galvacon, a grand idol of worship that, according to prophecy, would one day come back to life and free the entire land from the toxic air by restoring the atmosphere. The idol of Galvacon was believed to have been built way back in the days of yesterday when the chemical wars were alive with terror. This was a time of great chaos. Opposing forces attacked from all directions. The threat of total human annihilation became more and more a reality with the passing of each day. Then, powerful corporations began developing chemicals that were so deadly, nothing could prevent them from eating their way through the flesh of the humans, and even through the walls of the buildings. The cities were crumbling. The only hope of salvation for the remaining few was that the power of the Galvacon would one day come and save them. Eventually, the chaos subsided, leaving the tortured land scorched with devastation. The air was of no more. Only a dense layer of poisonous chemicals remained to flow through the aftermath of a most cataclysmic war. Those who did survive were forced to make do with whatever shelter there was left to find. They lived like vermin, scavenging through fields of debris, searching for food. They became overtaken by sadness as they wallowed in misery, patiently awaiting for the mighty Galvacom to unleash its power and cleanse the air. And although it never came to be, there are those who even to this day still await the rise of the Galvacom. Those who believe in its great power. It was considered to be so sacred that it even possessed the ability to bring forth truth and prosperity to all those who went before it and prayed for guidance. However, no one had ever dared to venture deep enough into the realm to see if the legend were actually true. For it was also said that the realm was infested with a mutant race of fearsome beings known as the Flashmen. These horrid savages which ruled the dark skies high above the land of the realm were nothing more than the remnants of an ancient world. Gruesome degenerates whose mutations had enabled them to live outside in the toxic air. They merely existed as nomads of the land, claiming the Tower of Yesterday for their own. They lived for no purpose except that of keeping close watch over the enormous structure, safeguarding it from all those who dared to enter. The Flashmen remained hidden deep within the thickness of the chemical clouds, shielding their frightening appearance from the rest of the world. They were rarely seen by anyone. However, passing travelers had often claimed that if you looked up high in the sky when the storms would rage, you could sometimes see the haunting silhouettes of these nightmarish creatures soaring through the air when the lightning struck. Quigley was astonished. He had always sensed there was something uniquely captivating about this aging structure which stood in the distance. But never before had he realized it contained such a history as fascinating as the one he was just told of. And at that very moment, something inside him began to awaken. He spent many hours lost in thought as he struggled to gain clarity from the words that Iroh had spoke. It seemed to him that the answers to all his problems could only be found through the power of the grand idol of Galvacom. That if he were to ever regain his hope for the future and find the true reasons for his existence, he would have to travel far into the realm and enter the Tower of Yesterday. And although he was an android who could withstand even the most cruelest of atmospherical conditions, he still was reluctant to undertake this journey of enlightenment, for his fear of the Flashmen would not subside. And then he realized that if he were to ever achieve the knowledge he sought, he would have to forget his fears and try to be strong. He could not afford to allow anything to stand in the way of accomplishing something as important as this. And as the iron doors of the laboratory airlock crept open, Quigley looked out into the vast obscurity of the lifeless land. He began to feel a certain confidence he had never felt before. Without hesitation, he made his way through the airlock and proceeded to embark upon a sensational journey into the realm of yesterday. The poisonous air flowed thick through the atmosphere as Quigley passed over the barren land. Nothing but a sense of despair surrounded him from all directions. As he entered the outskirts of the realm, he began to witness the dreadful sights of the tortured past. He continued to move further into the realm, using the tower as his guide. He crossed over aging bridges so old they were ready to collapse at any time. He made his way through long streets that were totally covered in miles of rubble. Death and destruction was all that he saw. Eventually, he neared the gigantic tower. Its true size was then revealed to him as the enormous walls of this incredible structure reached up high above the land. He suddenly became anxious from the mystery of what there might be waiting for him at the tower ahead. But regardless of the negative emotions to which he was feeling, he continued to journey onward, knowing that he had come too far to turn around and go back. After climbing over the last heap of debris, Quigley suddenly found himself face to face with the entrance of the tower. A deep moat had been roughly constructed around the doorway of the building to protect it from unwanted intruders. A long drawbridge made from scrap materials had been put in place up against the wall, sealing off what looked to be the only opening into the tower. The thunderous collapse and flashes of lightning from the storm above directed Quigley's attention toward the sky. Something was up there. Tiny figures soaring aimlessly through the sky. It was the Flashman. But the chilling sight of these freakish-looking creatures produced no fear within Quigley, as for some unknown reason he believed he was in no danger. They rode through the air like a ferocious pack of wild witches gone mad. They wore many layers of tattered clothing to hide the gross deformities of their chemically scorched bodies. Quigley made no attempt to hide himself within the rubble. The Flashman noticed him almost at once, standing by the entrance of the tower. The one who dominated the pack, who rode the highest of them all, grew very suspicious of Quigley. Of all the wanderers who had ever came to the tower, he knew there was something different about this one. Something that intrigued him. It was the Zychron component to which he was interested in. But he gave no orders to attack. Instead, he went for Quigley himself. He came down fast. Quigley remained frozen. He was still without fear and ready to accept whatever fate would be given to him. The lightning intensified. The Flashman made no hesitations. He reached for his axe and raised it high above his head. He was almost within range. Quigley anticipated nothing. All that prevented him from running away was his faith in the Galvacon. He believed in its power, and he believed he was meant to be there for reasons that were unknown to him. The Flashman was upon his target quick. He came about with great speed and then launched his axe with all his might. Quigley took a moment to perceive the hole of blackness that existed beyond the doorway. And then, with intrepid motion, he entered the tower and disappeared into the darkness. Inside the tower, Quigley slowly made his way through what appeared to be the remains of an old decrepit corridor. He seen a bright light shining down from the end of the hall. He wondered to himself if this was the brilliant light of the Galvacom's mighty power, shining robustly as it patiently awaited for his arrival. He then proceeded towards the light with an unknown certainty as to what might become of himself within the next few moments. He emerged from the darkness of the corridor and saw something he had never seen before. A machine so enormous it filled the entire room. The flashmen were briskly moving about, tending to the many control consoles that surrounded this gigantic machine. Most of the walls and even the ceiling above had been ripped away in order to accommodate its massive size. It didn't take Quigley long to realize that this machine was the Galvacom. This oversized bucket of bolts was the true reality of a legend deemed so sacred it was worshipped by many. If the people saw what Quigley was now seeing, would their faith in the Galvacom still remain strong? Would they still have believed that it possessed the power to save them all? With the press of a button, the flashman activated an energy transmitter which carried through the air a wave of information that produced within Quigley an understanding that would reshape the foundation of his entire life. And at that exact moment, everything suddenly became clear to him. The tower of yesterday, the Galvacom, the flashman, the chemical wars. He had seen it all with total clarity and knew what it was he had to do. For the flashman had always been aware of the terrible incident that occurred many years ago during the end of the chemical wars, of how the Galvacom's most crucial component had never been delivered, rendering this enormous purifier incomplete and inoperable. A misfortune that drained the land of all the hope it had once held towards a promising future. And by allowing himself to be connected to the Galvacom by the flashman, Quigley was not only restoring back to his own self the hope he once held towards a promising future. He was restoring it back to the lives of every living thing throughout the entire land.